Thank you. It's a great honor to be here and to have heard about all your incredible research. In this panel, what we want to explore a little bit more is how do we bridge from the research to the practice? So how can we bring science to policymakers? How can we bring science to business? How can we make sure that the science that a lot of you are leading can become the foundation for the decisions that are being made to ensure that we can remain with all this information, with these solutions, that they can be adopted and they can chart our course towards a direction that is within the safe and just boundaries. So this is what we want to explore a little bit in this panel. We have a fantastic panel, which I'm going to introduce. So to my left is Massamba Thioye, project executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub at UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change. Welcome. Then we have Céline Abecassis-Moedas, who's Associate Professor in Strategy and Innovation Management at the Catholic University of Lisbon School of Business and Economics. We have Salvatore Aricò, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the International Science Council. And we have Johan Rockström, who needs no introduction and from whom you've heard already a little bit earlier. So, to start with, I'd like to ask you, Massamba, a question about breakthroughs. I mean, we've seen just earlier, we've heard about some really cutting-edge science, some very interesting insights. But when we think about this bridge from science to policy, from science to practice, what are some of the breakthroughs that you would like to see in science and on science, so to speak?
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. Very pleased to be given the opportunity to be part of this very important panel. And I would like to thank Frontier for the invitation. So, climate and nature crises cannot be separated from the broader sustainability crisis. In fact, the challenge that we have to address is how can we satisfy the core human needs of the many people everywhere, no community being left behind, and doing it while keeping the world within the planetary boundary. This is the challenge that we have to address. Now, what are the key breakthrough science that can enable to achieve this goal? Well, they are actually those that enable the most transformative type of climate and sustainability innovation. Because most of the time, the implementation of science, its deployment to address societal needs is done through innovation. So what are these most transformative type of climate and sustainability innovation? First, we have those that are able to disrupt products and services that are currently used for the satisfaction of the core human needs, but that present a high level of negative externality. Examples include, for example, plant-based protein or lab-grown meat used to disrupt meat from animal farming. It includes also the use of GPS, GIS, remote sensing for urban planning and site selection to build a 15-minute city where most of the product and services are available at walking or biking distance, and then disrupting the use of motorized transportation. This also includes the use of connectivity to replace trip to school or even school building. Second category is those that are enhancing the efficiency of use of product and services. Think about innovative solutions that enable the scaling up of car sharing and carpooling. Third category, those that are enhancing the circularity of the economy. So these are the three categories of climate and sustainability innovation which need to be enabled by breakthrough science because they are the most impactful. Now, the breakthrough on science. Transformative science have set as goal to produce profound and far-reaching change, not only on knowledge, but also on technology and on society. Now, implementing this transformative science to satisfy societal need while keeping the planet safe is a very big endeavor, and this is what we would like to achieve. So it must use innovation, and not just technology innovation, but also policy innovation, innovative financial instrument, innovative business model, innovative cooperative approach, because radical collaboration will be needed, but also innovative product from the culture and creative industry, because the fact from science, the truth from science will need to be translated into emotion for action. So all these different type of innovative elements need to be mobilized, because what we are trying to do is nothing less than reinventing the world and reinventing ourselves. Science can contribute in reinventing the world, but for that it needs to enable the development of systemic innovation framework that is human-centric, that is need-based and not sector-based, that is vision-driven and not problem-driven, that is transformative and not incremental. That's very important. It has also to facilitate metacognitive reframing framework that will challenge the way that we are thinking, the way we are acting, and the way we are interacting all along the science and innovation value chain. These two epoch-making transformation at the macro level and at the micro level is what will enable to achieve this very ambitious goal, but they have to be undertaken in an integrated manner, because the global challenge, the global systemic change require individual action, but also societal shift. And at the same time, we have personal and collective transformation that require an enabling environment coming from system change.
Thank you. And I think from listening to you, we're already making that first step, right? From science to innovation with a systemic lens, adding all those other layers, right, of application, and you mentioned even emotion, and I think that's quite interesting. Let me go to you next, Salvatore. I'll come back to you, Céline, afterwards. Salvatore, your work also sits kind of on this bridge from science to policy, and I think my question to you is, if we look at science from the policy side, not from within academia, but if you look at it from the policy side, what are some of the breakthroughs that you'd like to see and that you think are needed in order to chart this course?
Thank you very much, Nicole, and good afternoon, everyone. I At the outset, I'd like to say I feel privileged to be here, because what has been called so far a Planet Prize is really becoming a Planet Prize movement. Not ideologically, not necessarily from an advocacy perspective. Well, responsible advocacy, yes, but I think we can all breathe a sense of purpose, a sense of growing consciousness, and a sense of urgency. And so, to answer your question directly, and if time allows, I'll elaborate a little bit, if not now, a bit later. I think the first thing that we need to realize is that the interaction between science and policy requires a brokerage role by scientists, and it's a dialogue. It's an interaction that goes in both directions. As much as we value the process of scientific assessments, such as the IPCC, the IPBES, I think those processes are starting to show some limitations in many respects. It's not only a matter of translating into a language which is accessible by policymakers the findings of scientific research. It also is about making that research actionable, that knowledge generated through research actionable in the first place. So in that respect, I wanted to share with you an example which is made by two large initiatives that on transdisciplinary research that the International Science Council has implemented. One on transdisciplinary research for urban health and well-being in African cities, and another one on a selection of case studies on transdisciplinary research in action all around the world, across systems, across scales. A large exercise lasted 7 years, costed 12 million euros, funded by the Swedish International Development Agency. And one of the key findings is that there is a need to really flip the science model, because scientists themselves, the way they frame research, the way they conceive, the design, the research questions, is such that it does not reflect anymore the complexity and the nature and complexity of the problems that we are faced with. Johan earlier said science can guide us. One of the recipients of the prize said there is a paradigm shift. And really, I think that shift has to start from within the science community itself. And it has to start by having scientists realize that the urgency that we are all facing becomes an enabling framework for science to get out of the bubble and reach out and take responsibility. And I think this is exactly what our champions are doing. So, science policy interface, yes, it is important, it requires brokerage, it's much more than translation. We've learned a lot for the past 25 plus years of science policy interface in action in relation to agricultural science and technology, climate change, biodiversity, but those processes show limitations. And I think it's time, by flipping the science model, and I'm not talking about the universal principles that guide science, such as research integrity, I'm really talking about scientists becoming actors, and science currently, no matter how curiosity-driven blue sky science continues to be important, because you never know in science where your nose will take you. You start by studying the energy flow in a seagrass ecosystem and end up working on the role of cloud condensation nuclei in the atmosphere. You really never know. But I think the sense of urgency is such that science really has to be framed through co-design with stakeholders other than scientific researchers, co-design the research agenda, co-produce knowledge in a direction that generates actionable knowledge, and this is something that we need to do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Salvatore. Very, very important points. I'd like to turn to you, Céline, and I mean, you work with business executives, and so I think the question to you is, on this point of making the research actionable, how do we make it actionable for an audience of business leaders?
Right. So let me first thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Camilla. Thank you, Henry, for this great initiative. You know, I think in a way, in this panel, I represent the corporate world, even if I'm not part of the corporate world myself, but I'm maybe the one that is closest to it. And what I feel is that the corporate world in this moment, and with the challenge that is being addressed here, feels a little bit lost. And they are looking for light and guidance from science, and I think, you know, this is maybe the best light and guidance that the corporate world can get. But we have to find more ways. You know, you were talking about bridging with the policy world. I think we need to bridge also very closely the science world and the corporate world. So, for instance, I expect and I hope that next year in this room there will be more corporate people. So, you know, I want to see people from the corporate world hear what you great scientists have to say, because, you know, this is so. Through policy, of course, you can make a difference, but through influencing or sharing your ideas and, you know, so I think it should go both ways, actually, because, you know, I want the scientists to share their results with the corporate world, but I also expect that the corporate world can come here with more specific challenges, and we want to see how this becomes the starting point for the next round of research. So I really want to see those two worlds working together, and unfortunately, today it's not happening that much. So either we need, you know, brokers or translators to help translate the science in a more accessible way to the corporate world, and we need the two worlds to really work together.
Thank you, Céline. Johan, you are deeply steeped in the research. But you're also often speaking to all sorts of audiences of policymakers, business leaders. What do you think are the biggest challenges that need to be overcome to make that bridge from science to application in policy and in business?
Yeah, thanks. And well, I agree with all my fellow panelists here, and you're right that we engage increasingly, and I would say that's another positive hockey stick, actually, with more and more with business leaders, majors and cities, civil society and community groups, but also with policymakers increasingly. What are the biggest hinders there? I think there are a couple of big items, and one of them is a bit self-critical, and one of them is a bit more outlooking. And I think the first self-critical one is that we, and I think you emphasized that partly, Henry, in one of your earlier talks here, that, you know, the academic process is all about debate and questioning, and, you know, you put out a result and then it's, you know, completely thrashed by your peers, and that's how you advance science. And there's always uncertainty ranges in all the science. And of course, where you're studying the whole planet, the uncertainty ranges are quite wide. But we are not able, as a scientific community, to be careful with how we then communicate that to the public. We tend to put out all our dirty wash to the public, and then everyone looks at the dirty wash and say, this doesn't look very attractive. I don't think I'll choose this pathway. And this is what the skeptics love, because they say, look at these scientists, they can't even agree. Let's just sit still in the boat until they agree. And the day we all agree, that will be a day too late. So I think we in the scientific community have to be much more careful with having our debates. That's the way knowledge advances. But at the same time, being quite careful with communicating what are we really agreeing on, and be very razor sharp with those messages. And for example, today, I would argue that there's unanimous agreement across the climate science community that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a real number. It's not a goal, it's not a target, it's a limit. Go beyond it, it causes danger. We can have discussions on how much danger, how much it will cost, how many people will suffer, if there are tipping points, but it's going to a point that will be difficult for us to handle. If you go out on the streets here in Villars, I can assure you that maximum 1 or 2 out of 100 will know what you're talking about if you tell them 1.5, what do you know about that number? Nobody will know anything. So the ignorance is just tremendous in a situation where that's the most important number on planet Earth. The number that we all should act upon, the number that everyone should trust today, because the science community is absolutely unanimously behind it. And still we're allowing ourselves to send confusion, even us in the scientific community. And then we're polluted by the troll fabrics and all the, you know, neo-fascist efforts of just misinforming everything. So we're in a conundrum there, but we are actually ourselves partly to blame for this situation. So that's kind of one challenge. But the second one, more on the most positive side, is that we've come to a point, undoubtedly, where we are sitting on the major joker card to accelerate a positive change, which is that we know empirically today that the sustainability transition gives better outcomes. We will all be winners if we solve this problem. That was not the case even 5 years ago. I can tell you that it really starts after the Paris Agreement. It was actually behind the scenes that business stepped up and gave the political leaders the confidence to sign the Paris Agreement in the first place. I mean, science played some role, but actually business was very instrumental and has then continued the path towards seeing sustainability more in the light of advanced technology, of competitiveness, of Massamba's point about innovation, and that this is also not coming out broadly enough. But we know today, for example, we can say without any hesitation that you can choose any market in the world. Coal will never compete with renewable energy systems if you are trying to invest in either heat or electricity. Coal can only survive with subsidies and vested interests. That's a fantastic message. Another fantastic message is that electric mobility is outcompeting all types of industrial combustion engine in any market today. I mean, European Union even has to put tax restrictions to compete with China. Did you know that 90% of the cars sold in Norway are electric? Not hybrid, electric. It's a tipping point. They won't return to the combustion engine. That's yesterday. That's the old dirty yesterday. Tomorrow is the positive, clean, sustainable path towards a safe landing, but also prosperous landing. And I think, why aren't we better at getting that narrative out in the scientific community?
Yeah, thank you. Salvatore, I think you want to comment, please.
Yes, I wanted to rebound on what Johan said, especially the first point on self-criticism. So I don't know how many of you know that the International Commission on Stratigraphy has decided that the Anthropocene is not a geological epoch. That decision was taken last year. It was kind of reopened. There was a heated debate, but again, they confirmed that from a scientific perspective, it cannot be considered an epoch. And yet they recognized all the implications of human-induced effects on the planet. And I think this is really, while fully respecting that decision, this is an indication of the fact that scientists sometimes are not, don't seem ready to really take up that role. And yet, science also goes through its ups and downs, because Johan recalled earlier that, he reminded us that in the late 90s, under the leadership of Sibyl, who's here, the IGBP, the International Biosphere Program, which was essentially the scientific community organizing itself in the context of this first ever program on global change research, actually published a synthesis book which was called The Anthropocene, and demonstrated that we are already in the middle of the Anthropocene. So now to react on Johan's second point, which is more positive, and to finish on a positive note, the time for science to take action is now. Because, if I may take one more minute, earlier today we had the workshops, and one of the participants said that politicians listen to the voters, they are influenced by the corporate sector, but they don't necessarily work with the truth. Science actually does work with the truth. We don't claim that science is the absolute truth, but we tend to work with the best possible evidence that we have now, and we are not afraid of reopening that evidence. So I think if the scientists said, you know, a politician would jump on it and say, oh yeah, we live in the Anthropocene, and use that for his or her campaign, scientists need to be more bold and really, you know, get out of the comfort zone and take voice and take responsibility. And just to finish, the International Science Council is supposedly the custodian of a very important principle, which is called freedom and responsibility of science. So science should operate in a way which is as free and independent as possible. But the notion of responsibility of science so far has been limited to science integrity. And we are trying to expand that notion to also encompass the fact that scientists also hold a degree of, you know, a portion of responsibility towards society. So the time is now. The time is now. Science is becoming increasingly open, also thanks to the efforts of visionary people like Henry, Camilla. So let's take action now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some challenges, obviously, to bridge from science to application implementation, but we have some examples also of where that can become a virtuous circle between policy, science and business influencing policy. From your point of view, can you address those two sides, right? The challenges, but then maybe also some solutions or some examples that you've seen where science can be brought to implementation rapidly?
Yeah, I would like to first maybe have a slightly different view on the lack of connection between science and society. Science is value neutral, and it produces truth. What enables science to impact on society is innovation. Now, the reality is that innovation has always an agenda. And so far, it has, to a large extent, served power, be it economic power or military power. What we need to do now, if we want science to support the sustainable transition, is to have science enabling climate and sustainability innovation that serve the many people and the planet. Another important aspect is that, to a large extent, the innovation framework that we have is what I will call a product push innovation, where you develop an innovative solution and you look for use case. We can have also some, let's say, more targeted innovation, but most of the case, they are also problem-oriented. So you use innovation to solve an actual problem. What is really lacking and is needed is what I will call a vision-oriented innovation framework, where we paint first the vision we want for our children, our grandchildren. How do we see our future, and backcast from that future, translate it into innovation and science. And for us to be focusing on the people, I have mentioned that we need to reinvent ourselves, the way that we are thinking, the way we are acting and interacting. We need to be able to promote the adoption of three important core values along the science and innovation value chain that are caring, sharing, and daring. Caring is extremely important because it actually drives commitment and motivation, facilitate collaboration, and also inspire action. And more importantly, it acts at the supply and the demand side of climate and sustainability solution. If we genuinely care for the planet and its inhabitants, the policymakers will make very ambitious goals and targets that will lead to a high demand for climate and sustainability solution. And at the supply side, the solution provider will be also more committed and relentless in face of challenge and difficulties. Sharing is extremely important, and I would like to insist on that aspect. Sharing experience, sharing knowledge, sharing best practices. This enables to learn from each other, and because it facilitates replication, it reduces cost, and enable communities that have low capability to participate in innovation process. And this is very, very important to have the innovation process open so that individual citizen and community with low capability can also participate. This brings a grassroots perspective in the innovation process with input that are coming from local perspective. And more importantly, it contributes to the inner development of these people that are participating. And finally, daring is very important because most of the time we are setting our goal and our target on the basis of our perception of what is possible, not on the basis of what is needed. If we want to address the climate and sustainability challenge, we have to set our goal on the basis of what is needed, and then the gap between what is needed and what is possible will be the driver of innovation and science.
Thank you. I really like this framework, and particularly the vision-oriented innovation perspective. And I think that's a good segue to you, Céline, because you also work on innovation management. And I'd like to ask you, well, first of all, how does that resonate with your work? But also, how do you see the role of executive education in terms of helping to, connect some of these pieces together and bring the science, kind of embed the science in the decision making and in the education of the business leaders that come through your institution?
Right. So Johan spoke about ignorance, and there's still, unfortunately, a lot of ignorance on this topic and on many others. But on this one particularly, and I think what we all share here in this room is the importance of education. So we all agree that the role of scientists is to educate the next generation. I think we're all aligned on educating the youth, and we're doing it. But what is happening today is that the speed of science is such that it's not enough to educate only at the beginning of someone's career. So there's many different trends. One of the trends is longevity. So we're living for much, much longer today. Science is moving very, very fast. So we cannot expect that we can train people in their 20s and that the knowledge that they get in their 20s is going to be sufficient for the rest of their career. So we need to train them we need to train people at multiple stages in their life, and that's what executive education does. And specifically on this topic of sustainability, what we find is that there's an increasing interest from the corporate world, from business people, to better understand what is at stake. And what I have observed, let's say in the last 6 years that I've been in this position, is that it started as a topic that was a side topic that it was nice to have, something that it was nice to discuss. And today it is really center stage in the preoccupation of business leaders. And on top of that, and linking to the part of the policy making, typically the legislation in Europe has changed and is keep on changing, and the type of requirement on firms, and our corporate has increased a lot, particularly in this year, in 2024, to get ready for the reporting of 2025. And what I see and what the discussion that I have with the CEOs is that they're completely lost. So they understand that they have to do a totally different reporting, but they don't even know where to start. So they need hard scientists, soft scientists, so human scientists. They need a lot of education. So our mission is, and our mission, I think all of us, should be to train people at the beginning of their career, but to keep on training them at different stages so that they can participate and learn from the latest developments. And typically what is happening here should be, I would like to see the result of what has happened here. I want this to be shared with the executive education participants in the next years.
Thank you. Johan, let me go back to you. There's a few themes that have come up, right? There's this question of co-design, there's a question of urgency, there's a question of trust in science. What examples have you seen? I mean, you mentioned the Paris Agreement and how business science policymakers how there was a bit of a virtuous cycle there. Are there any other examples that you can share where you've actually seen this process of accelerated application of science in the real world that we could be inspired by, and that could be models that to think about, to replicate?
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, there are many, and of course it would be almost professionally mismanagement if I didn't tell you the best story, and it's of course when the science behind the stratospheric ozone depletion was set scientifically in the early 1980s, which led to a Nobel Prize, which then led to policy listening, which led to the Montreal Protocol, which led to a legally binding agreement, which then industry innovated and deviated away from the release of ozone damaging chlorofluorocarbons, and it took 20 years, and the ozone hole is healing, and I think it's last year that NASA finally basically says we're moving towards a closure over the summer of the southern hemisphere above Antarctica. It's a perfect example of how the world of policy listens to science. The world at large trusted science. Nobody has seen an ozone hole, by the way. Nobody even knew really what threat it was, but the assessment that this was an existential threat to humanity on Earth was taken seriously. Policy listened, industry was ready to innovate, and we got an agreement and implemented it. A second good example, I think, is what happened last year in Kunming and Montreal with the Global Biodiversity Framework. There was a concerted effort by the Earth Commission, by the whole planetary boundary science community, all the NGOs in the world, from IUCN to the WWF to basically all of them, backing up the nature positive agenda of halting biodiversity loss and moving towards regenerative rebuilding of nature by 2030, quantifying it according to the planetary boundary framework. And then we got exactly that agreement. Will we implement it? It's still to be seen, but at least I think it was a science-informed policy decision at the global level, which I think was very important. And then the final example is actually here in Europe, where Commissioner Hoekstra, the climate commissioner, listens to the European Environment Agency's advisory board on climate change that translates the science into the need for Europe to step up its 2040 targets for 90% emission reductions by 2040. And the Commission takes that policy and internalizes it within the European Green Deal, which, by the way, and perhaps Sandrine will talk more about that, is under threat now with the new parliament. But this is science-informed policymaking at quite high level. And then, of course, you could go out and discuss a lot on the whole deep sea treaty debates right now, which are also heavily informed by science, and there's a debate between the mining and the science community. And remember, to close this, that the Antarctic Treaty is soon up for renegotiation. And that is perhaps one of the most beautiful global commons treaties we have, because it's based on using this global commons only for science and for peace. And how to maintain that will be, I think, up for us to defend scientifically. So yes, there are many important examples, I think, where, and I haven't even touched on the climate regime, but of course, science was behind the Paris range. I mean, this is a planetary boundary range. I was in the corridors when this happened, and it's complete nonsense, by the way, when people say that 1.5 was simply a compromise to be nice to the low-lying island states in the world. Complete nonsense. I mean, this was really a severe debate between science, policy, and civil society, and to put it simple, we won.
Thank you. I think it's really important for us to keep those examples in mind so that we know that it is possible, right? And so we only have a few more minutes left, but before the kind of closing round, are there any other examples from all of you sitting here that you'd like to share where you've seen this come together effectively? Yes, Salvatore.
Yeah, thank you. Another example, so I completely agree with Johan, areas beyond national jurisdiction was something I had in mind. The new implementing treaty linked with the Convention on the Law of the Sea. Another one is, we hope, the International Treaty on Plastics. And the International Science Council was approached because there was no mechanism to organize the science of plastics in the context of the formal negotiations. And yet, there is a lot of expertise. We even have a champion that worked on that. Another example is the Convention on Biological Weapons. They don't have a science mechanism either. And they, again, I mean, not to do any propaganda, they approached us to say what kind of models of a science policy interface can be used for a convention which is, you know, a very important convention if you think of that, especially in a world, in the heavily polarized context that we are living in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So all these examples, I think, are very important examples where science and policymakers have worked together. But for all of them, this is about solving a problem. And this is about scientists informing policy decision. What is very much lacking is situation, and this is actually what is relevant to our current case, because as I have mentioned, the challenge that we are facing is we want to build a world where the needs of the many people are satisfied while staying within the planetary boundary. This is the vision. What is lacking is a situation where we start from the vision, from policymakers, and backcast and translate this into innovation and science that everybody will need to work. That is what is the gap currently.
Thank you. And that also points to leadership, right? And the need for leadership to have that vision and to drive that vision forward. I think we only have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to ask for a 1 minute or like one sentence closing. We have a lot of youth in this room who are thinking about their journeys in science or business or policy. And I was just curious, I mean, all of you have such experience in these fields. What's your key takeaway kind of message that you'd like to share with the young people in this room? Would you like to start?
Yeah, I think youth, it's about building their future. So it means that they have to contribute. And this is a right. And for youth to be able to fully contribute, they need to be prepared for that. So it means that they need to be involved in the process of science and innovation. And it's only possible if we have open science, open access. So, and this is why also the Global Innovation Hub is strongly supporting with Frontier open access.
Thank you. Céline, one sentence of inspiration.
So one sentence to the young people in the room: accept no boundary. No national boundary, no field boundary, no corporate versus science boundary, no science versus innovation. So accept no boundary.
Thank you. Salvatore.
Yes, so actually two sentences, if I may. One is that we are undershooting on social boundaries. And linked to that, my message to the youth in particular, and including the next generation of scientists, is precisely that whatever you do, even if you are working on the biology and ecology of an insect, ultimately will contribute to making science, will help science contribute to social justice. And in that sense, science can be seen as a platform for all stakeholders to come together and co-design the research agenda, the science agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Johan.
Yeah, no, so we face major risks, we know this, but we also, as I've mentioned earlier, know today that solving these problems makes us all winners when we come out in the other end, both in terms of prosperity, equity, and resilience building. And that is something that we really need to work together on, the new narrative for the future. And remember one really important thing. When you're in big systems transformations, all empirical evidence shows that you don't succeed once everyone is agreed with each other. You succeed when you have a large enough minority that tips over the passive majority because your solution is better. That is what empirics show. And that is based on Roger Everett, 1962, the theory of diffusion of innovation. And is so well established. Large enough minorities can tip over the passive majority. It's a David and Goliath situation, and therefore one should never give up.
Thank you, Johan. And I will close, I think, with the word responsibility. I think that it's very apparent that it's a shared responsibility we have. And all these notions and the examples we gave were also a lot about the co-design and how do we bring these worlds together. Thank you. Thank you for the great panel.